Well, I think we're at 2:04, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll continue to admit as they come in.
Not sure where the camera is best.
They're all around.
They're all around. I'll never know where. Well, thank you so much for joining us in person, and those of you that are joining online. My name is Doug Placzynski. I'm the director here at DCHC, and I'm a leader and a partner with a bunch of really great teammates. Here at the MPO, we have a staff of 11 and a program, I believe, of 14 that we're rounding out. We do a lot of different things. It's definitely been a very productive 15 months since I joined the MPO in the middle of 2022. Now, if you're not familiar with MPOs and you're here, that's great. If you are familiar with MPOs and you're here, that's great. We're in a very dynamic environment. So don't think that you're going to be an expert leaving today, but please rest assured that we're here to follow up and support anything that is happening in our communities. I grew up not that far from here, split between Carver and Durham. I went to Southern Durham High School, the old Southern over on Ellis Road, right at the 147 interchange. And let me assure you, in 9th grade civics, they did not teach us about metropolitan planning organization or regional councils or tax authority districts or water resource districts or any of that stuff. It's all very foreign. It's all very bureaucratic. It can all be very frustrating. We get frustrated with it too, but we're here to work together with everyone. So anytime you ever have any questions or concerns, whether it's as a product of today's discussion or something we do later on, just feel free to reach out. Really excited to introduce Kelly Fomenko, who will be leading us through our program today. Kelly's also been with the MPO about a year, and she joins us with a great amount of experience and lots of different things, including paratransit. And she works on a lot of project programming and public transportation issues here at the MPO. So take it away, Kelly.
Thank you, Doug. I do want to put out a disclaimer. If anybody does have their microphone on at 2:20, we do know there's supposed to be an alert going on everybody's phone. So
Good reminder.
Please silence.
yes, it's an emergency alert, just testing the system. So be aware of that. At 2:20, we might have a pause just in case. So as an overview of today's training, this is also just a general discussion we can have on regional coordination and what that looks like. Introduce you to what an MPO is, what DCHC MPO does, where we are, who we represent, look at why we exist, governing documents behind some of that, what our major work activities are, as well as some other smaller pieces that fit in. And then a little piece to see to help you share what you've learned today with residents and other people you know. Welcome, come on in. So what is an MPO? So there's a few stages that got us to where we are with MPOs. So in 1962, the Federal Highway Act created piece of legislation, right? So it said that any location, urban area that had at least 50,000 people in it would become an MPO. In 1965, that transitioned to be more of the modern day foundation of MPOs. So it had more to do with federal grants and regional planning. In 1980, that's when DCHC was founded. And in 1991, you see a lot more authority that's given to MPOs. In the past, it used to be more based on elected officials making decisions. And now it's based more on increasing that local participation and things along those lines, get everybody involved, all of the stakeholders. So the MPO lives by the 3C planning process. Those are continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive. Those ensure that everybody gets involved, everybody has a seat at the table, and includes a plethora of stakeholders. So you can see up here, we have aviation authorities. We do not technically have aviation within our DCHD boundaries. We have one just outside in Campo, the capital area MPO. And we have a joint document with them, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So we do see that aviation piece and have to coordinate to make sure that across boundaries, we're coordinating regionally. We also have port authorities, and although we don't necessarily have a port nearby us, we do have to make sure that we coordinate with other locations in terms of how freight is going to get from a port to where we are. Everything is connected in that way. We also have municipal, county, and regional agencies. DCHC is Durham, Chapel Hill, Carrboro, MPO. And that means that we have the city of Durham, Durham County, Carrboro, Chapel Hill, Orange County. We have other members. We have, I know I missed, we have R2P. We have a bunch of different stakeholders that are a part of our daily conversations in that regional coordination effort. And we do have some transit agencies as well. We have Go Triangle, we have Go Durham, we have other transit agencies around here that are Go Cary, Go Raleigh. We have Orange County Transportation. So again, making sure all of the plans that are coming together and all of those routes make sense, are coordinated so that you can get from one place to another. In North Carolina, we currently have 19 metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs. We are soon to have what looks like a 20th. That will be the Pinehurst MPO. That comes with the 2020 census. And like we said earlier, an MPO needs to have at least that 50,000 people in an urban area. So based on some of the population changes, that now incorporates and additional opportunities for other MPOs to be created. So that is one of them. Outside of those MPO areas, there are rural planning organizations, also known as RPOs. Are there any questions at this point in time?
When will Durham go over the 50,000 and with that split, Chapel Hill and Carrboro?
It's whereas we are over and we've long since been established as a consolidated urbanized area.
Okay,
So that's why we're all together. There were some changes to the census in 2020 that they had never done before. So there had been a very consistent methodology for establishing where urban areas were and how to count that population for several census cycles. And most recently, they have the Census Bureau updated their methodology, and that did create some changes to the Durham, Chapel Hill, Carrboro urban area. It actually did not increase the urban area that much with the new census. But our population within the urban area is still significantly increased. So that's a part of the story about infill that we hear so much about. Even though Hillsborough and Governor's Club, and there are a couple of other small census designated areas outside of our main area that are in our total planning boundary, we work with them too. Just when the federal government and the state assigns funding ratios to the work we do, they use the core urban area population.
the census. Okay, thank you.
So we, even if we wanted to expand our areas, it wouldn't change our funding. It's set by the census number.
Thank you.
And so for DCHC, these are current boundaries. So as we were saying with the census, our urban area has changed. I don't think our boundaries are changing, but that's not true for other MPOs based on this past census. They're still drawing lines and determining exactly where that sits, but other places are looking at potential growth to different counties. But we're staying pretty standard with our boundaries at this point in time. So for MPO composition, I think I missed Hillsborough in the last go around for all of our different agencies and jurisdictions. But we have within these boundaries, the towns, cities, counties, universities have a seat at the table as well. And then we have the state, federal, and transit agencies. We work very closely with NCDOT every step of the way. We have a lot of our projects are specific to that federal funding that has to be routed back through them. So it's a very important coordination effort. Yeah.
Question, what's NC dot bot? I don't know what bot is.
Sorry, Board of Transportation.
Okay.
And North Carolina Department of Transportation is NCDOT, in case anybody did not know that one either. So our MPO board is made up of members from our jurisdictions and agencies, as I just mentioned. So we have the City of Durham, we have Durham County, Hillsborough, Chapel Hill, Orange County, and Carrboro. We also have, like we said, North Carolina Department of Transportation, Board of Transportation. They make the ultimate decisions on the state side for policies and so forth. And we also have a seat for Go Triangle, which is the regional transit provider. We have a non-voting seat for the Federal Highway Administration as well. For the technical committee, so we have meetings that occur once every month for our technical committee and once every month for our board. The board is elected officials, the technical committee are the staff of those member agencies. So you have the same places as we mentioned before within these boundaries, Durham, Chapel Hill, Carrboro, all of those locations. And then we are the lead planning agency staff in addition to, I think, 6 others. So we have 11 of us. And we present information to the TC and the board based on all the stakeholder engagement and interactions we have leading up to those meetings. So stakeholders will involve all of those members, they'll involve the public, they'll involve TC and board members. All of that comes together before we go out and put an agenda out to bring those items forward and make some changes. As I was mentioning before, the board has their monthly meetings. They also have other special meetings to address how we might want to progress the MPO, put our best foot forward, make some changes as necessary. They are ultimately the policy board. They make the decisions. So anybody here, if you end up being on our policy board, you are in charge of making those decisions at the end of the day. The technical committee.
This is a test.
Take a pause.
Good deal. Okay.
Well, there goes the ones, okay.
That means not to all devices.
Even if you've silenced it.
It's a test. We knew it was coming. Okay, we are good to proceed. And so MPO staff, like I was saying, we carry out the directives from the board, and we put everything together to bring forward, make sure the projects come to fruition. The MPO has a bunch of governing documents that we abide by. So we have our MOU that establishes who is a part of the MPO. So those members, this document is a little bit older. It's from 2014. It does need a refresh. But we recently were under the City of Durham. We have just transitioned to Central Pines Regional Council. This is brand new. We were just saying earlier, this is a brand new room. This is, I think, the first or second meeting that's been held in this room since it's been renovated. But so these offices are very new to us and we're still transitioning ourselves. We also have a set of bylaws. So there's one set for the board and one set for the technical committee that lays out the what essentially your role is, what your task is in making these decisions to bring forth transportation projects. We also have the State Government Ethics Act. This is something that we update once a year. So every person who ends up on the board will have to fill out this information, basically saying that you are, performing ethically, not doing anything for the benefit of yourself. But that is something that happens every year and at the beginning of every meeting as well. We also have our public involvement policy that lays out how we engage with the public. This is also being refreshed for next year. Typically is done, I think, every 5 years. And that essentially says for all of our plans what we're intending to do, how we reach out to the public, newsletters, surveys, putting ads in the paper, things like that. For a general understanding of the process, at the MPO, as I was saying, we work with a lot of diverse stakeholders. So there's a lot of conversations that are happening between staff and between stakeholders at any given point in time. Within the MPO staff, we have Doug, who introduced us earlier. We also have the planning side of the house, the modeling side of the house, and then the technical side of the house. So things that are related to the website or making sure that we have all the programs and data we need to move ourselves forward. We take all of the information, all the planning efforts that we do, and we bring them forward to that technical committee first. That is a meeting that happens once a month at the end of the month. It's the fourth Wednesday currently. The board will then receive that information a couple weeks later on the second Wednesday of the month. Between the technical committee and the board meetings, there's good potential for things to be updated and before it's brought forward to the board, because ultimately we want to make sure that the board has the information that's digestible, that makes sense, that is very clear, because you are making a very important decision at the end of the day. And then the board will give us that information, approvals or clauses to approvals that we take back and figure out what we do with it from there. At any given point in time, the public is given a seat to participate. So you can either reach out to the MPO staff directly, you can participate through your stakeholders. That includes any of our members. That could be the cities, the counties, the transit agencies. You can speak at a technical committee meeting. You can speak at a board meeting. There's a lot of open sessions for that, and we are constantly doing engagement. It's pretty much happening on a daily basis. Are there any questions at this point in time? Yes.
So how what's the membership of the board versus the technical committee?
So both are made up of members from the same jurisdictions and agencies. Except I think the makeup is slightly different with how many of each are on there. Those are in our bylaws, but we have on the technical committee, it's staff from those agencies and jurisdictions. So the towns, cities, transit agencies. The board is the elected officials from all of those that represent those jurisdictions and agencies.
And I'll interject real quick. Federal regulations stipulate that our policy board members must be elected representatives. So even our Go Triangle representative is from their board, not their executive staff.
Oh, okay.
So I think the only thing that Federal Highways has allowed differently with our board is that there's the NCDOT State Board of Transportation appointee is allowed because they are appointed by the governor's office. And the governor's office has a little bit more latitude than most of us others when it comes to that. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Any other questions? Yes.
A dumb question. So what's the relationship between the Central Pines Regional Council and the MPO? Is the MPO just like housed here or like,
Yes.
is it the same or yeah?
I don't know some of the specifics behind it, but yes, we are housed here. We are technically independent in terms of the choices we get to make on funding and things along those lines.
Or does staff overlap or the staff?
We are technically employees and we follow the employment rules that are set by Central Pines. The board of the Metropolitan Planning Organization has the authority over hiring, firing, establishing positions, establishing a budget for our group. So the Central Pines provides the administrative oversight, the financial support in terms of managing our finances. They provide insurance that covers an umbrella policy that covers our activities. But they do not direct our policies.
You're directed by the board.
We're directed by the MPO board. And we annually propose a work program to the MPO board that's approved by the MPO board, then approved by NCDOT, and then signed off on by Federal Highways and the Federal Transit Administration.
And if there are any questions online, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll call upon you throughout the presentation.
Or type them in the chat.
Yes, also an option.
So this section is going to be a lot to digest, so we're going to take it slowly. If you have a question at any point, you can raise your hand as well. But so we have a handful of plans that we continuously update. Our comprehensive transportation plan, the CTP, is our longest range plan. So that covers everything. It's comprehensive. It's 30 plus years. We say 30 plus because technically the Metropolitan Transportation Plan is 30 years. It is currently 2020 to 2050. The differences between those are the CTP is not fiscally constrained, whereas the MTP is fiscally constrained. And the CTP is mandated by the state in a way that the MTP is, I think, federally mandated. So we'll run through some of those elements later. But the reason why these plans are all going to be interesting in their own rights is the comprehensive plan is, as we say, it's comprehensive, it's everything, it's a wish list. The MTP is something we put the financials towards to say, these are what we really do plan to do for the next 30 years. If we want to put anything in our short range plans, moving forward, we would look to the MTP and see what we still haven't done, and then bring that into our short range plan, which the short range plan in this case is the Transportation Improvement Program. That is a 10-year plan. We are kind of in between adoptions right now. We're still waiting on approval of our plan, but as soon as we get that, which should be in the next few weeks, that will be the FY 2024 to 2033 plan. So that's pretty current. It's a pretty recent update. The Unified Planning Work Program is that 1-year work program. That is the shortest one. That is basically we're working off of, like Doug was mentioning, that's a planning supplement. That is how we determine how many staff members and things like that, and what we're going to be doing for the next year in terms of different efforts, different studies, different planning items. Are there any questions on that? We are going to move into a little bit more detail as well. So like we were saying, the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, it's a wish list. It's 30 more years as the state requires. Ours is at least 30 years. I don't know how much more it extends at this point in time, but it's all potential projects. This one was updated in 2017. I don't believe there is a timeline for the next one to happen at this point in time. But so the most recent one was 6 years ago now. And that can be amended. It's not as typical that we would do something like that, but it does happen. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the MTP, like we said, that one is 30 years. It is fiscally constrained. It's separated mainly into 3 sections. So you would have projects that we foresee in the next 10 years, and then projects from 10 to 20 years, and then 20 to 30 years. That's how it's set up to be fiscally constrained. So we can make sure that when we say this amount of money will be spent in these 10 years, it makes sense based on the projects that are put in there and so forth and so on. We actually do ours joint with the capital area MPO, so the neighboring MPO. So our MTP will show some variation. For example, we have a couple sections such as the goals and objectives. And so our goals and objectives are slightly different from those of Campo's objectives. We do have that MTP effort that will be showing up shortly. That will be the 2055 or yeah, 2055 MTP. So that'll be years 2025 to 2055. We are actually going to have a survey that's coming out for those goals and objectives as our first phase in November. So it's pretty soon. But this is updated every 5 years. Yeah, and so like I was saying, this provides information on what projects will be included in that shorter range plan. So when we look to see what projects will be coming up and what we should do on new adoptions of that shorter plan, we look to the M2P for that guidance on what we originally planned for. So the transportation improvement program, that is the short range plan, that's 10 years. The first 5 years of that plan are projects that are currently programmed. There's money on them. There's a plan to move it forward, and those funds have been given to those projects. The second 5 years of that plan are what we plan to have moving forward. It's just that it hasn't been decided what whether or not those will come to fruition in the same way. So they're in the state transportation plan, that they have to match our plan. The state plan has to match the MPO plans. And that's kind of why we're still waiting on the adoption. The state has to, or the federal government has to check all of the MPO plans to see that they match the state plan. But those second set of years, the last 5 years, they are planned to happen. It's just that something might happen that pushes them out a little bit further. They're a little bit less guaranteed in terms of the exact timing of when those will happen. They are given dates in there so that you see where the money is planned to be used at that point in time. And we also have state prioritization, which is the way that projects get funded to be put in this plan from the state level. And we're going to go into that in the next slide as well. But we are currently around 7 of that prioritization. It's a technical program that the state runs to fund those projects. Does anybody have questions at this point? This is where we're going to start looking at how projects really get funded.
Which timeline would you end up buying land or putting things under like a hold or sending landowners? Like, is that part of this process? Is that all the time throughout all of these timelines? Where does that start in the process? Is it all over the map?
It really starts with the comprehensive transportation plan.
The 30 year.
So that very long vision, and how it's established under North Carolina law allows each community to use its comprehensive plan, your land use plan, to anticipate future right of way for those transportation improvements. So that's one example of how, even though we're going way out and even though it's a very high level concept, those principles can apply to some of the work and some of the developments that are happening today. That being said, there's a careful balance, right? You don't want to think too far ahead and too ambitiously and then end up unfairly or inappropriately constricting activity that is happening today. So there's definitely a balance with that. But then, you know, some of the specific actions you mentioned, like design, purchasing right of way versus making sure that it is purchasable, or actually building a project are within the transportation improvement program. So they're going to have a designated funding, an identified phase in the construction cycle that'll be moving forward, and that's 1 to 10 years.
Thank you.
So there are a couple ways that projects get funded through the MPO. One way is through the state, and then we'll talk about some of the funds that are specifically funneled through the MPO after that. But so the state has a strategic transportation investments law, so it's called STI. Essentially, that governs a competitive process in which MPOs and RPOs from across the state and the highway divisions all compete for funding. So what happens is it's a 2-year long competitive process. Projects right now, so we just adopted our 2024 plan. Anything that will get funded in the 2026 plan. So basically, as you do that new adoption, then you start the new process for funding 2 years out. And so what happens is you have a certain allotment of projects that you can put into that process. So there's a handful of modes. There's bicycle and pedestrian, highway, rail, and transit. So we get to select a certain number, and this past cycle, it was 24 per each mode for DCHC MPO. I think Campo had something like 40 per mode, it's based on population. And so we could choose amongst members and have those discussions on which projects would get submitted. Essentially, the main thing to remember is funding is very, very limited. Actually, in this cycle, based on COVID and inflation and everything that's happened, we don't expect basically any projects to be funded in this cycle. That is still 2 years out. So we're thinking 4 years out is when we'll start seeing projects actually start getting funded through this cycle. But also that in order to get funded, you have to be as competitive as possible. So that means that you have to have a certain degree of necessity for safety measures. You need to have technical data that shows that this is really necessary. They also have an odd split. So it's more geared towards highway projects and less towards the other modes of transportation. 90% in this past cycle of funding would go towards highway projects, whereas 6% of that would be going towards the bicycle and pedestrian, rail and transit. And then there's a 4% flex. I think I said 4%, 6%. There's some flex in there, so it could go either way. That extra flex money could go either towards the highway or towards all those other modes. So you might be more likely to get a highway project funded than you would be to get bicycle and pedestrian project funded. And so that can be very difficult as a process, especially being very competitive across the state for who needs projects and that money the most. Yes.
Who defines that? I mean, that, I know when I arrived in 1981, there were signs that said North Carolina's futures built on roads. So I know that this is the history in North Carolina, but why is that still in place?
The state legislature, that's those limitations. They wrote them directly into the law. As you are engaged with the work we do, you'll find that most of the sentiment in the Western Triangle is to not build highways. It's to invest in all sorts of modes of transportation to help connect people. But we are bound under the statewide law.
And how much of that highway money is defined for new highways versus repairing what we have? And does that include bridges and things like that?
Under the STIP funding, the state transportation investments law, the majority of that funding is for new roads and expansion projects. there is a separate pot of money that is roughly equal to that amount that's meant for things like pavement and bridge preservation. And that they're set into two separate enterprise funds for the state. I'm not the expert on that, but that's my understanding. It's about an equal part of the overall bucket.
Thank you.
And highway projects too, it's not just highway, it is broken up into different, I think there's 25 different options of what kind of highway project you're trying to get funding for. Some of them could be intelligent transportation systems. So signalization, we have a couple of signalization projects in there for our 24 that we were allotted. It can be intersection improvements, things along those lines. So it is a wide variety of different projects that can be submitted in that category.
Great point.
Where does the funding originate from? Is it all North Carolina tax base, or is it from the federal government as well?
I think it's a combination. There is definitely a funding formula. I'm not sure of the exact specifics. I could send that to everybody separately, but it is a combination of different funding sources.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Kelly. It's there's federal gasoline excise taxes and diesel excise taxes. Then there's North Carolina statewide gasoline and diesel taxes. There's registration fees and license plate fees. And then last year, the legislature did set aside a portion of state sales tax receipts into transportation funding, about 6% of the overall, or indexing up to, in 2 more years, 6% of the overall collection of state sales tax.
So that 6% split? No matter where the source comes from?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, there may be some adjustment, but the dominating investment is going to be in roads.
A recent,
Another question, but there's also federal funds that are that are transportation broadly, not highway funds, right? Those funds are also in the same formula, aren't there?
No, they're in a different formula.
So this is only about, this is state priorities, but it's with some federal dollars.
Right, so there are funds that come from the federal government that are not mode specific, and then there are some that are. So you have funding that may come from the Federal Railroad Administration or the
Transit.
Federal Transit Administration or pipelines, or I think there's a maritime category of funds. But a lot of those funds under North Carolina's laws, the state legislature said if it's flexible and we can direct it towards highways, in general, we will. And it flows through that 94 and 6 formula. There are some that don't. And there's so many different funding categories that have so many different requirements. There's interstate maintenance that can only be spent on interstate highways. There's National Highway System funds these are federal programs that can only be spent on a certain hierarchy of significant roads. It really just depends.
You know, that money flows through like state DOT, is that how
It does.
it doesn't come directly to you all?
Very limitedly. The model in this country is that federal money flows through the states. Occasionally, we will have a direct program. We have a small direct grant from Federal Highways for regional safety analysis. That's coming straight from FHWA to us through a project agreement. But all of our other federal funding comes through a federal administration that's signed off by the state.
So are y'all looking at opportunities with the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and we support our members and their applications to different grant programs.
And do you think the switch from the 2 to the 4 years will be the new normal going forward? Or will it ever go back to 2?
It's been as long as 6. It really is, however they can.
Because of COVID, so.
Yeah,
I wasn't-
however long they can get along in Washington and fund authorization bills. Now, of course, no matter how long those agreements are in DC, what we're seeing now is still an annual budget fight. So the money is authorized, the Congress still has to appropriate it every year. And typically we'll see a great big authorization and then, they chip away at it and whittle it down through the annual appropriations process. And that's happened in the 20 years that I've been doing this pretty consistently.
And going back to the split, so it's the 90% highway, 4% flex, 6% of all of those other modes. It actually did change. In order for this process to work, the STI law, what happens is they have a work group that meets for about, I think, half a year or so, and they make some changes. So the last cycle, it was actually 94 or 6-4. So they actually added 2% that was designated for those extra modes. So it's changing a little bit. It's just, not as much as we would like to see. As far as the funds that are directed more from the MPO level, we run a call for projects annually. That is a competitive process, but for members specifically. So funds that are in that are discretionary funds. The surface area block grant is one of them. We have transportation alternatives is another funding source that we have. We also have carbon reduction program and the congestion mitigation. So last year we ran that and we only ran it for 1 year in the future. So we had $5 million that could be used up from members in that competitive program for FY24. We are currently in the call for projects for FY25. So we've just begun that, which applications are due to the MPO by the end of November. But essentially we'll be running it 3 years in the future. So we'll have like maybe 15 million, maybe less, but 5 million over each year. So for years in the future, so for next year's program, we would only be funding that 3rd year out because we would have already funded and used all of our money for what we would have planned for at this point in time. But essentially, this is the competitive pool or pool of funds that the MPO determines how those funds get distributed. So those could go to any one of those types of funding sources. They all are slightly different. So you couldn't have all those projects get congestion mitigation grant funds because they don't apply. They don't do anything with carbon with that project, things along those lines. But we try to do more pedestrian and bike projects with this kind of a program. We look at safety concerns, how the project connects to other roads and jurisdictions. We look at equity, so how many people in the area are in need of something like this. There's about 10 factors or so. So that's the competitive side of making sure that if you have a project, it is the project with the most need, and the policy board does also approve that policy. So that's how we determined that competitive side. So we like the state have our own, it's just more geared towards the other modes rather than those highway projects. We specifically don't allow for roadway projects, yeah. Yay.
What's the scale of this compared to the state priorities on the previous slide? This is like 5.2 million. What's the other?
Depends on the year. I think it's 5 billion for the state usually, something like that, or it's a couple billion versus we have 5 million. But that's across the state versus just our MPO, and there are 19 MPOs, so it's a little bit different. Yeah.
And this comes from local tax revenues, or where does this money come from?
This is our direct apportionment.
This is federal.
Yeah.
That's federal.
Federal.
It's the other federal stuff.
And this is appropriated to us based on our designation as a urban area with over 200,000 population. So smaller urban areas get less of a slice. that's a little bit more uniform, larger urban areas that are, I'm not trying to kill you with acronyms. We're called a traffic management area. So we're like the large urban areas. It's going to be Campo, us, Greensboro, Winston, Charlotte. I think the Asheville might be a TMI also by now. We get larger apportionments that are tied more directly to our population that the federal government assigns to us. So.
The other thing with this type of a project is we do require a match at the state level. So you do need to provide a 20% local match on any of these funds. We also have the 1-year program, that's the Unified Planning Work Program. This is where you can see breakouts for different kinds of funding sources. So you see BGDA, so that's the block or surface area block grant, and the Transportation Alternatives program. We typically had blocked a certain amount of those funds for use in the UPWP. We also have competitive grants, so we have things like 5310 that's geared towards those with disabilities and older populations. So things usually revolving around transit and getting people from one place to another, aging in place kind of a concept. And then we also have different studies. This is typically where you would see different planning studies. So one study that was funded in the last year was a parking study out in Hillsborough. But that's just an example of where you might be able to use some funds that are not maybe going to get funded in another program. So going back to this item, for the call for projects that we do on this 5 million, these are capital improvement projects typically. So these are items that are going to end up in the STIP and require you to have different stages. So how much money you're spending for moving around utilities, buying easements, right of way related items, construction. In the 1-year program, you have the UPWP that's more geared towards those planning and feasibility studies. So to be able to get that project off the ground. There's other planning work too that we do that are outside of those major plans that get updated every so often. We have the county transit plans that are run by Durham County and Orange County. Those are 10-year programs, and then they have yearly programs within that. There's a staff working group that's made up of the county, the MPO, and Go Triangle, the regional transit provider, to go through and determine what will be funded for 1 year at a time. So that's where you see a lot of transit projects come in. There's bicycle and pedestrian planning that's happening. The MPO is leading an effort on the Durham Bike and Pedestrian Plan. That's a joint study between the city and the county of Durham. We have an environmental justice report that we update. I believe it's every 5 years. So that's coming up on an update in the next year or so. And that looks at, of course, equity and making sure that we are looking out to the places with the most need and making sure that we are covering those bases. Did you have a question?
Mhm.
Okay. So we also have air quality. So in order for something like the MTP, the 30-year plan to be updated or amended, it goes through an air conformity process. So to determine if there will be any changes, basically within like a 10-year timeline, because there's the 3 sections of the 30-year plan. So it's first 10 years, and then the next 10 years, the next 10 years. If things kind of change over those boundary lines, you might require looking at air quality conformity. So making sure any projects that are changing won't have an impact on the overall air quality that might be happening with those changes. Yes.
Are we in attainment now or in non-attainment?
For example.
We're in attainment, but we're maintenance, so we still have to provide evidence that we're meeting our budget.
Okay, thank you.
Comes to the bike and pedestrian planning, is that just road, or does that also include like greenways that are an extension of parks?
David, could you answer that question a little
Yeah,
bit?
it could include greenways or trails, extension of parks, yeah.
Oh, we also have other special studies that do come up, corridor studies and other items like that. And we do have the transportation demand management. That is done through Central Pines. We pass through money to that, just like Campo does. It's a program basically that you can have a project start in there for a year. If it goes well as a pilot, then it stays in the program. But it can be related to all those items that you see there that are transit or bike or carpool and items like that. Are there any questions?
What, on the slide before?
Yes.
So telework and flexible schedules, is that at all connected to the internet connectivity infrastructure that we're spending on recently with federal money? Or is that a completely separate thing?
I'm not sure. Can you be more specific?
So there is a statewide program to be able to help strengthen our internet connectivity through rural areas. And there are grants that are being distributed to different localities, and I was wondering if this is at all connected with that.
So we don't directly interact with that here at the MPO. I'm not sure if Central Pines has a role with some of their member communities that fall outside of our areas. We do attempt to account for the increased share in work from home and telecommuting in our analyses. But we're not directly associated with delivering any of the funding or implementing the projects that are associated with it.
I could see that in a program such as this, you might have something related to how to add internet connection to a bus, like a school bus or something in a rural area. I know I've heard of things like that. I'm not sure of all the eligibility requirements, but that might be an option for a program like this.
Thank you.
We just have a little bit of how to share some of this newly found knowledge, if you learned anything today. But just knowing that every decision that is made for transportation across the region takes a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of engagement that's happening all the time, whether or not it's directed from the MPO or from our members or whatever it is. We're all part of the process. So there's hands touching it at all points in time. And these plans that we have in place are very long. They've been vetted. There's been a lot of time put into them. So changes are potentially less likely to happen just because there's already been so much engagement that's happened with stakeholders, the public, and so forth. We do have our website here. In the meeting link, I provided this link actually for you to go see these materials that we presented today. It also has an additional set of materials that are the bylaws or anything that you might be interested in that I shared but didn't necessarily have a link to in this presentation. We have additional congestion mitigation training on there if that's of interest to anybody. But the one at the bottom, I think, is probably the most helpful. It's the Residents Guide to Transportation. This is relatively new. This was done by the state. And they presented on this year, so it just came out recently, but it has some videos on there and it has a brochure. It's basically just helping understand how transportation does work for the average person to see that doesn't have time maybe to be a part of this process, isn't part of the final decision-making that the policy board has to do or just doesn't have time. It's a more digestible version to you. So if you pass this along to anybody who could then have a conversation with you later on, that would be great about to come off of this presentation. Are there any questions? Yes.
So I'm wondering about the residence guide and whether there's resources that explain things like induced demand, the life cycle of a highway, reduction of, carbon by bike trails, that kind of thing.
It's a good question. I don't know all the specifics off the top of my head. It's relatively new to us too. I know that at the MPO level, we're working on having some resources available. I think we had a meeting today that we talked about how we could at least find that information and share it accurately. So whether or not that's putting it on our website in addition or whatever that might be. But I don't have an answer for you because I haven't had time to go in and look very closely.
I think, certainly those are some very interesting topics, and we would love to convene discussions with, there are professionals and academics in our region that is their expertise, that's their space. We'd love to invite them or have them come and present to all of our members and the public about some of those issues, because I think they are helpful to understand.
Yeah, I work in the community sustainability space. I was at EPA doing that for 20 years. And one of the things I think that's difficult when you're working with the public is trying to explain something which includes inherently some counterintuitive information. And I think that we, as people who are working in the public sphere, would do well to try to explain that to people a little more. And it's a difficult thing because it's all complicated, but they would support decisions better if they really understood the real implications of a lot of them.
Yeah, I think some of the things that we're going to explore is, in-person topical university sessions, short training videos or articles, that may be a couple minutes and very bite-sized to get one particular concept across, and sort of build out a library of those basics and then move into some of the more advanced topics. I think we can all agree technology is changing now faster than it ever has, but we know it's going to change even faster tomorrow. So, we're trying to keep up. Right now they're talking about inductive charging on roadways. So we don't have to even plug in your vehicle. We don't know what the future is going to look like. It's just going to be wild. So, these are not necessarily concepts that we can even imagine now. Not that Donald Rumsfeld is my favorite person, but sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So.
Yeah, if they're not in that residence guide, we can look to see if we can find some resources to provide.
Yeah, not just the residents, but that, given that as Congress has shown, any yahoos can get elected to something. Educating the elected people who end up on the board is going to be important too.
And of course, if there's ever any specific questions that might require a deeper dive, that's what we're here for too. We can research topics and provide information back. And not just exclusive to transportation, that's also part of our role here at the Regional Council. So if it's recreation and transportation planning or, land use and jobs balance, we have those resources too that are available.
Thank you.
We have someone online, David Adams.
Yeah, I have a question because I see a lot of, I have to say, bureaucracy here, and I don't quite see how it fits. I'm a big fan of passenger rail. So how does DCHC work with what's going on with the commuter rail or with the high-speed rail projects? Give me an example of how you work through those and what level of authority you have in making decisions. I'm a little confused about that.
Well, right now, improvements that support both intercity passenger rail and conceptual commuter rail or regional rail, whatever you want to call it, are in our long-range transportation plan. So that's the fiscally constrained multi-year vision that right now we have through 2050. So if federal money becomes available for improvements, because it's in our plan, we can program that funding to deliver projects. We've acknowledged that there's a regional concept for making those improvements. And as federal money comes forward, we can program it into our short-term plans to enable our partners to spend, whether it's DOT or Go Triangle or another provider. We're definitely looking at that. We also understand that the concept of regional rail is very complex throughout our region, that there are components of regional rail that go beyond just a corridor from West Durham to Auburn in eastern Wake County / Johnston County. So we're trying to also understand how we can best support communities like Hillsborough with a potential intercity passenger rail station, or places that might not be on an active rail corridor to better access that form of travel. So that's a really bureaucratic and complicated way of saying we help and we support. On our own, we don't devise the project and implement it, but we support our partner agencies that work on those initiatives, the counties, Go Triangle, our partners to the east, and of course, NCDOT.
Can I ask one follow-up question?
Of course.
It has to do with residents getting involved, and I would like to get involved in having Amtrak service that actually goes from Morehead City to Asheville. So we have many times a day between Raleigh and Charlotte. So we have a sort of a north-south, but we have no ability to get to the mountains or the beach, which I think would be a big plus. So what could I do as just a common citizen to try to impact that?
We can follow up with you offline about some of the initiatives that are going on. There are long-range concepts in the works to expand intercity passenger rail. A lot of those, unfortunately, are, there will be some performance-based approaches, but that's not to say that it's not feasible or that there aren't very ardent proponents of that right now. I believe Metro Mayors had an event in Asheville not long ago supporting the potential of a recreation of passenger service westward. And I know we've discussed at a kind of a statewide level of passenger service eastwards towards Wilmington or Morehead City or somewhere that way. But I think we could get you some more detailed information.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have one more person online, Marshall Williams Jr.
Yes, can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Welcome.
Okay, welcome. Thank you all so much. I appreciate everyone taking their time. It was very informative. Quick question. Correct me if I heard this correctly, but I believe you said the federal funds were designated to us based on our population size being under 300,000. Did I hear that correct?
Being over 200,000.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. My plan is also the question with the rail. As the population starts to grow, and will that play a factor in the federal funds looking at as possible for a rail or federal funds associated with rail before 2050? I just don't know. I just see the need maybe in this area kind of being before that timeline. I didn't know that. And then I didn't know if there was spec'd out to see what the projected cost of a rail would be. That's it.
Commuter rail would be very expensive. And it's expensive to a point where we would need, with our current available resources, some funding from the federal government. you're right with population growing. And it may seem as if there are some very dense parts of the triangle in terms of population and housing units. But in reality, there's still a divide between areas of density around potential rail access and where we would have to be to meet the thresholds for that federal investment. So part of our work is not only with actual capital improvements, but to help our communities plan to increase density around potential rail stations so that we can make a business case for that investment.
I got you. And then, and last follow-up question, just wanted to make sure. So basically, yeah, I read the report from the Go Triangle, unfortunately failed attempt with the rail beforehand. But when it comes to partners or capital investments, is Duke still the biggest potential capital partner that we have on our side?
No, the communities have authorized locally collected sales taxes for some of those investments. So that really is the largest source of where the funding would come from.
No, I meant private investment, not necessarily consumer funding. Because I know that was a big thing with Duke potentially being a capital fund source for, and that changed. So I didn't know. That's what was said is to be kind of the reason for the rail maybe faltering before. So I just wanted to get any more clarification on that.
I think that's a really complicated situation that I wasn't participatory in.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, no worries.
But
yeah, I just
at this point, we're not aware that Duke is a capital partner in any of the investment.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I know there was an additional item just on rail. Like Doug was saying, it's a very expensive item, and going back to the state process, we had actually submitted some rail projects that were kind of aimed towards adding some of that capital investment into something like that. So that's kind of another way in which, because the project is so large and so expensive, trying to see if you can get some extra funding through that process.
That's a great point, Kelly. I think I heard.
I just had a clarifying question around light rail. So I believe over the summer, we received an update stating the Fed said they would not fund commuter rail and they were more interested in bus rapid transit. So just trying to get clarity on like what the future vision is for rail current and based on what the current federal environment is, and them saying no. If you need them to be a major funder in that and they've said no, then what is the plan like moving forward?
So I think that you're not incorrect, but it's a high level generalization.
Okay.
All over the country, there are active commuter rail projects. However, most of those projects are extending existing commuter rail systems. In order to meet what the federal government would like to see for a level of investment, you have to show a very high ridership and a very high land use coordination. The work that was done here did not seem to lend that it would meet those thresholds. So we would not be eligible across the whole triangle for federal investment. The thresholds and the planning work needed for bus rapid transit are different. And we're finding that we are likely very successful for some of that federal investment. Raleigh has received funding or will in the upcoming budget. Chapel Hill has submitted for funding and they have a very high likelihood that they will have a bus rapid transit corridor invested in. Now, that's not to say that we're not still working towards fixed guideway rail of some sort, whether it's light rail or commuter rail. But right now, the climate does seem to be that the federal government's more willing to invest in bus rapid transit.
And so is Durham in the pipeline or thinking about any bus rapid transit plans? Or they submitted anything for it?
We are working on that. So as part of their transit work plan, they have an item that, nobody wants to go through more studies, right? You know, study all the time. But they've asked us to help coordinate a strategy to position Durham City and County to develop a project that is likely to get federal funding on top of other improvements. We really feel like Durham deserves a win. You know, we've worked hard and we don't really have a whole lot to show for it. So right now we're trying to get some national expertise in with some very high level strategy to tell us what we need to do to position ourselves.
So like my final, sorry, I don't want to dominate the space, just like one last question.
Sure.
So to the topic of light rail, so since we don't, they're like, if I was correct, they're only funding existing projects that have shown to proven ridership. So since we don't have any rail, does that mean the possibility of ever getting rail is like highly diminished because we don't have like a baseline to show that people are invested and the ridership is there, or?
That is a little bit how it works, and it sounds counterintuitive. They let you estimate.
Mhm.
But of course, what they're gonna do is want you to estimate something small that you can get some evidence for. So the process makes you establish basically a critical link, which is obviously not like a 42-mile commuter rail project. You know, what's something small? And in a way, BRT is kind of the same, but because we have projects in Chapel Hill and Raleigh, we have some local examples that we can infer potential ridership from.
Okay.
The other thing is, you know, what's the local investment going to be with supporting the infrastructure? Do we have, you know, train station investments? And we're getting them. And those are some of the incremental things we can do along the way to make our application down the line more successful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In reference to that bus study for Durham, it's also going to be called the bus speed and reliability study. So if you hear about it, that's what it's related to.
Bus
So,
what and reliability?
Speed.
Bus speed and reliability. Sorry, bus speed and.
Oh, speed. Got it.
Yes.
Sorry.
so this sort of piques my interest because if Raleigh is getting a BRT system and Chapel Hill has a BRT system and Durham's in the middle, right? Like the idea of being able to get from one part of the triangle to the other part of the triangle seems quite enticing without having to take a car. So do you have more of a chance, per se, to be able to connect those if Durham gets one?
Of course. And there are, you know, there's regional bus service now. It's just not as frequent or as convenient as a BRT type service would be.
My favorite description of BRT is bus resembling train.
I think you talked to some of the same friends.
Must have been part of our presentation before, huh?
Yeah.
Malazzo.
Yeah, we work with RTA a lot. We actually just went on an intercity visit to check out some BRT. I was in Cleveland last week and I took pictures of their system. You know, I'm kind of a transit nerd, so you know, I really like that stuff. But it's you know, it's and there are benefits, not just that BRT vehicles are more accessible. They're less of a barrier to those with physical disabilities. They can operate more frequently. There are other sort of time improvements that they can make. But I'll throw this caveat out there and having already acknowledged that I'm a huge supporter. BRT, the rapid, is really only about a 19 to 20 miles per hour average on any BRT system in the country. So we call it rapid, it's faster than normal buses, but you know, weigh that as and that kind of gives you a better scale where rail can definitely move more rapidly than that.
Yeah.
So.
And electric bikes.
Yes. Yes, there are some issues with state law that prevent us from really making some public investments in e-bike access. But we're trying to figure out a way around those or maybe get some legislative changes. You've probably heard of areas in the country doing e-bike rebates. You know, we'd love to stand up a program, maybe even through the regional council, provide access to those. But you know, that's we're just starting to understand what that would take.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just wondering what the opportunities would be. Back to David's question about the mountains to the sea. Whether or not there's opportunities for that kind of regional BRT, or at least us.
Intercity bus. I
Yeah.
think right now there's one bus that gets between Raleigh and Asheville a day. It takes about 6 hours on Greyhound.
Yeah.
There is actually a study going on, a survey related to intercity bus.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
they're looking into more efforts on how to do that and where to connect to.
yeah. I mean, regionally, I've taken the megabus to Washington. My daughter was in school there and I did it for years. And so, we see enough of those going commercially. If we could create our own state system, that would be.
Well, I think the existing system does probably receive state support. So they're surveying how to enhance that more.
Oh,
And of course, with additional state support, you'll get reduced travel times and more buses and more destinations. My parents used to send me on the non-express Greyhound to visit my grandmother in Kinston. Thanks, Mom and Dad, because that took all day.
Any update on the S line?
The latest on the S line is they've submitted a grant application through a federal grant program to to engineer and design and build out several stations on the S line, including a passenger platform at RTP.
Yay.
So pending funding award, and that's through the North Carolina DOT Rail Division. Pending a funding award, there could be a platform, I think by 2028 at RTP. And then we're working on how to integrate a regional multimodal center into that passenger platform there.
Great.
So that's exciting.
Faster than I thought, so that's great.
Yes, it came together very quickly and
The line's there, so.
we have to give a lot of credit to our partners at DOT. Sometimes they're not our friends, but, we try to maintain the best working relationship. And that was a case where they really pulled through to incorporate that into the application.
That's great.
If you think of something, don't hesitate to contact us later. We'd be more than happy to follow up, have more conversations, research. And thank you to everybody, both here and online, for taking the time to come visit with us.
Thank you.
Fortunately, we've got a lot of work to do because people are moving here faster than anyone ever imagined. So that creates a lot of opportunities.